Welcome to the Happy Mama Movement podcast. I'm Amy Taylor-Kabbaz, mama, journalist, coach, and founder of Mama Rising. This podcast is a space of community and collaboration. We gather stories of matrescence, motherhood, womanhood, and change told by our Mama Rising coaches and mothers around the globe, in the knowing that through our stories, we can begin to heal and change the way the world sees, values, and supports mothers everywhere. So, welcome to the Happy Mama Movement. Welcome back to the podcast, everybody. So many times, the joy of motherhood and matrescence and the experience of becoming a parent can also coincide with grief. For some of us, it is a grief of not having a parent here in those amazing moments with your child, seeing them become a grandparent. For others, it's grieving the ending of a relationship, the family that you thought you would have and what it would look like. And also, a big part of the matrescence experience is grieving who you used to be, parts of your life that at the moment feel inaccessible. Grief and matrescence often interact and overlap. And what I've seen over and over again is how we move through matrescence is very similar to how we can move through grief. Today, I am speaking with a Mama Rising coach and facilitator, grief educator, speaker, writer, and CEO of the Non-Linear Journey, Ilana Yahdav. She is a mother of 2 young children and combines her expertise and experience through grief, through losing her dad, and experiencing first-time parenthood without him, with so many women around the world, and really looks at this intersection between matrescence, motherhood, and grief. Whether you are grieving someone special in your life, the way that you thought your family would look, the birth and motherhood experience you so wanted to have, or grieving who you used to be, this insight from Ilana will really guide you and support you and inspire you. Enjoy. Ilana, thank you for joining me on the podcast. This is such an important conversation. I'm so honoured to be able to bring this to everybody.
Thank you so much. I'm so honored to be able to be here with you and to talk about. It's very near and dear to my heart.
So as everybody's going to hear over the next half hour or so, your experience of losing your dad and navigating grief at such a young age, and then becoming a mother and navigating matrescence has really opened your eyes so much to the similarities, I guess, the intersection between grief and matrescence. But I also want to start by saying, first of all, when we talk about grief, there are so many different versions and layers and examples of grief. This is maybe somebody you've lost in your life, but also grief is such a big part of the very experience of matrescence. So if you're listening and you feel like, oh, maybe this doesn't relate to me, I just wanted to start by saying that the way that you speak about this, beautiful, is so important, because in our culture, these are 2 things that we don't really talk about very well. We don't talk about how to navigate grief, and we definitely don't talk about matrescence. And so this is, like I said, such a powerful and important conversation. So let's go back to the story of your beautiful dad and what it was like to lose him without an understanding of how to process that properly.
Yeah, there's a lot to share there. And I would just also add, we don't talk about grief, we don't talk about matrescence, and then we don't talk about the intersection of grief and
Definitely.
matrescence. And So when my father was diagnosed with a very rare form of brain cancer, well, it's very rare back then. Now it's a lot more known. My entire world shattered. I could barely function. I was living abroad and working in China. I came home back and forth. I was a mess, frankly. And what I didn't know then that I wish I knew now is that all of my feelings were valid. All of my feelings were normal. I wasn't too much. I was a daughter who was very close to her father, who just learned that he was dying imminently, like very shortly. And so after my dad died, I really got very deeply lost in just my grief and my darkness. Again, I had some incredible people show up for me, but I didn't have the language. I didn't know how to describe what I was feeling. A lot of people in my world, my grief was too much for them. I didn't know this back then, but it's because it was about them, not about me. It was them not able to process, but they took it out on me. And I didn't know how to separate that because I was just so distraught. My dad's last words were happy birthday. He died hours after my 24th birthday. And I vowed to myself when I got to a place of healing, I would do everything in my power to make sure that no girl felt the way or no person felt the way that I did, that they knew their grief was valid, that it was okay to cry uncontrollably when you buried one of the people who literally, like, I wouldn't be on this planet without him, literally. And so I made that promise to myself. Now it took me a good decade to get to that place. And actually, it's interesting because I got to grief and matrescence kind of in a similar way. So the day I discovered what grief recovery was, and the day I learned what grief is, and that there are tools to work through grief, and that all of my grief was normal and natural and valid, all of it. It was a huge eye-opening for me. And like, I love Dr. Aurelie Athens' quote is, words create worlds and words heal. And so the day I learned about grief recovery and got certified actually also happened to be the 10-year anniversary of my dad's passing. I did not plan it that way. The universe was saying, okay, it's time. It's time. And I was also getting married and felt like there's a couple things I could work on before introducing, more changes in my life. And so that really changed the trajectory of my life. Fast forward a couple of years, I had kids. I had my first daughter in the height of the global pandemic. She's named after my dad. And then I was just unpacking the grief there of being pregnant in a pandemic, of an entire global pandemic, and all of the many, many layers of grief that we were all experiencing, from your favorite coffee shop closing to not being able to see your friends, which people say are trivial, but if it affected many people, to losses, to deaths from COVID, to deaths that weren't from COVID, that were marginalized because we were so busy, grieving COVID. And none of this is to sound as a criticism. We were all grieving, and we're still feeling the residual effects years later. And so I was feeling very lost in my motherhood. I didn't know it was matrescence. I was experiencing many levels of grief. I was working with grieving clients. At that point, I was only working, I was working with a lot of people who lost their father, because that's, like my specialty, and working with people who lost jobs, who lost children, and then I was realizing just really that intersection of grief and motherhood. Again, I still didn't know what matrescence was. And then one day, your name came into my world and changed everything. I had no idea how to pronounce matrescence for the longest time. I was like, what even is that? How do you say it? How do you spell it? And then I bought your book. I read your book. I devoured everything you and Dr. Athen wrote, and Dr. Sachs. And then I saw your course and I said, that's it. This was the missing link. This is everything I've discovered that I didn't know how to name. And again, words create worlds. Words heal, as Dr. Athen says, because it healed me in so many ways to be like, wait a second, all of these pieces that I've been putting together, Amy's already put it together and is able to help be that final piece that I was looking for of matrescence, because what people don't realize, and when they hear grief, and I should probably pause and define grief here too, is when we hear grief, most time people think death and
Mm.
divorce a little bit, but mainly it's death. And when people hear grief, they're like, oh, no, stay away from me. It's not contagious. Like we're all going to experience grief at some form, but grief really at its core, and my training, I'm trained as a grief recovery specialist, is that grief is the normal and natural reaction to the loss of any kind. And it is those conflicting feelings around any change or end of a familiar pattern of behavior. Is that not motherhood?
Mm.
Like to its core? Like, you
Yeah.
know? And it's so and so when I was putting all of this together, I was grieving being able to nurse my daughter, still grieving that, and her being in the NICU and all of, the complications and all of these things. Those are all grief. And then grieving when she took her first steps, because, it's joyful. Missing my father in a whole new way as I watched this beautiful human that, I created, never get to meet him and him never get to know her. And so I can pause there, but I just think it's so important for everyone to realize that when we say grief and motherhood, grief and matrescence in the same sentence, it's not a bad thing. As moms, we're grieving and it's beautiful. Getting married. Okay, some people think I'm being snarky here. I'm not being snarky here. Like when I say getting married, it's a grieving experience because it's a change in a normal pattern of behavior.
Mm.
Having a baby, starting TK. I mean, we're getting ready for that. And then think about other layers like middle school, high school, college, empty nest. Could go
Mm.
on and on. And so I'm
Mm.
just so passionate about taking those two worlds, combining them and really helping normalize, because we have to normalize matrescence and normalize all that grief that make matrescence beautiful, awful, wonderful, and everything in between.
Oh, I love this so much. When I look back at my own experience of becoming a mother and also reflect on the thousands of stories I've heard over the last decade plus period of time, the grieving of who I used to be was the hardest, most silent part of
Mm-hmm.
becoming a mother. I think we are not allowed, we think, to talk about missing our old life or missing our old relationship, our old passion, drive, body, freedom, independence, bank account, all the things that massively change.
Yes.
That was actually the part that I struggled with the most. And I thought that, as you know, as so many people who listen regularly to this podcast, I thought that that was, that made me a bad mother. I thought that longing for or missing my old self meant there was something wrong. But the way that you speak about grief as a normal and natural process when something huge changes in your life, I mean, gosh, if I'd known that, Ilana, what a difference that would have
Mm.
made. So when we talk about that, you talk about grief recovery. Can you explain what that is and what that looks like for someone who either is just moving through the matrescence process and the grief of accepting how they've changed, or much more specific grief around a loss? What is grief recovery?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And a lot of it, I'll give you an example based on what you just shared about grieving your identity. I mean, of course we're grieving our free baby identity. I don't know why society, like all of us, society is just so ingrained, like you're going to become a mother and then all of a sudden you don't matter, just your children, and you have to be a martyr and give up everything. And that's just simply not true. I think a huge part of grief recovery, specifically, I'll talk within the context of motherhood first, is what you just is validating everything you just said, is us knowing that, because it can help. It doesn't take away the pain and the grief. Of course it doesn't. But that validation piece, that
Mm.
knowing that you don't have to love every second of being with your baby. I don't know who made that up. I mean, I like I love my children madly. I don't want to spend every second of every hour with them. Like,
Mm.
do I miss them terribly when they're not around? Yeah. Do I look at pictures the second they go to bed? Yes. But does it make me a bad mom that I'm also counting down the seconds that they go to bed?
Mm.
No, we're human. And so that's one of the biggest things I also just want to reiterate as part of understanding grief and matrescence is that we're still us and we're still allowed our feelings. There's no
Mm.
shame. I think Brene Brown talks about shame so much. And that, of course, we're going to grieve like our sleep. Who else is grieving sleep? Who else is grieving? Like, I miss my favorite pair of jeans. I
Mm.
grieve that I can't put those on. I grieve that I can't
Mm.
go to boozy brunches anymore without like planning months in advance for a babysitter for the day of and then the next day. Cause, I have a glass of wine and being a mother, I can barely hold my one glass. So,
Yes.
so a huge part of grief recovery is the validation of all of this. And, we talk about it a little bit lighthearted here. And, with
Mm.
the sadness, there's the joy. And, people also think that when we talk about grief recovery, it's going to be like all doom and gloom and tears. And yeah, there'll be tears, but there's also laughter because it's not, it's and or, so a huge part of grief recovery also is learning the tools to understand and work through grief. So we approach, grief, a death, an actual death of a loved one or a less than loved one, someone who you didn't have a chance to repair a relationship with. We call that a less than loved one. There's those have, specific tools and to grieve the life that we had. Again, it's also a lot of it starts with language. One of the biggest tools we have is language to be able to express what we're feeling. Because to name it, what is it? To name it is to tame it, and to start
Mm.
to name it and build that awareness because we can't work on really what we're not aware of. And so
Mm.
our bodies are so subconscious. Our bodies always keep score. I forget who said that. I know someone famous said that. And wasn't me, but I'll borrow it.
That's right. Full credit to
Yeah.
whoever it was. It was
Yes.
someone too, but it's early in the morning. I can't think of it right now,
Yeah.
but that's okay. Yeah, our
Yeah.
bodies do keep score. And the other thing that I notice so much in the women that I've been speaking to over the years, Ilana, is that when you enter matrescence or those little milestones throughout motherhood, like you said, starting school, the first steps, the first birthday party, all of those moments can bring new layers maybe. I don't know. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. New layers of grief.
Yes.
You long for your dad to be there for those milestones. So often in the women that I've spoken to, again, their reflections on their relationship with their own mother or father become even more raw and real in that experience of becoming a parent themselves. That's it, we really don't acknowledge what it is like to become a parent when you're still processing, even if it's been a decade, your own parents. It's huge.
It's so huge. And again, it's something also not talked about because becoming a parent, any wound that you might have had, no matter how deeply subconscious it is, definitely can get brought up. And I like to say, it's an invitation to explore. It's an invitation to heal. And is it fun? Okay, not so much all the time, but what a gift it is to us and our kids to be able to break generational traumas. And, when we have our kids, as moms, we want to just protect them from everything. And, using an example of starting school, it can also maybe remind us of, say, we didn't have an easy school experience. Say we felt left out in grade school or we're bullied or we're going through
Mm.
something else and kids can be really mean, then our subconscious remembers and then we can start to inadvertently place all of these fears and anxieties on our kids, or when we think of, empty nest and think about what it was like the first time we left the home for whether it was to go to work or to college or whatever, and can, start to remember all those things or a relationship with our mothers, like some people who didn't have a good relationship with their mom, all of this can be brought up by becoming a mom and then things that you maybe haven't thought about for years. Like I remember not getting chosen in drama class in like third grade and thought about it the other day because I was worried about my daughter on the playground, and I kind of rolled my eyes at myself, but I was like, wait a second, like let's think about this for a second, and we do that to ourselves. We sometimes are worse than people around us. We invalidate our own feelings. And so motherhood will bring up everything. And then when you add like life right now, like
Yeah.
we're going to have losses. We might lose a job. We might lose a loved one. We
Mm.
might, be living in a world that is politically crazy. Sorry, I'm not
Mm.
supposed to say that
No,
on air.
no, that's fine. That's fine.
I won't go further. But no, but when we're living in environments where there's bullying and there's
Mm.
cyberbullying and all kinds of things, it can bring up stuff from our childhood. I mean, luckily when I was a kid, Facebook didn't exist, and the internet really didn't exist. But all of this is to say is it is a invitation for us to explore what comes up. And really, what I encourage everyone listening to this is to not discount feelings that you have, especially around your child's milestones, anything that may come up for you, because it's your body and your subconscious's way of just saying, hey, there's something that just needs a little bit of love. And this is
Mm.
not to say you need to go to therapy, and although I think everyone should be in therapy and coaching, but this is not to say like to go create something that's not there, but to take a few minutes of like, oh, like check in with your body. Why am I feeling this way? What happened? What memory here just needs a little bit of love? Because it all compounds, especially being moms, as our kids get older and experience new things. And as
Mm.
we experience our matrescence and becoming and unbecoming and rebecoming and all of the ways that we change our identities. And to the identity piece that you shared, it's interesting that really, there's such pressure of like, are you wearing your pre-maternity jeans? Are you back to a size of whatever? Or are you back at work or back at this? Why are we in such a rush to go backwards when really having a baby, you can only go forward? Like we're not,
Yeah, there is no going back.
yeah, I've,
Yeah.
I've tried.
Yes. And that reminds me so much of everything you talk about with grief as well. It's when you lose somebody or you go through a divorce or, these huge moments of loss. Once again, like you said, there's so many similarities between the way that we treat becoming a mother and the way we treat grief, that there is this expectation that at some point in the future, you're going to go back to feeling like you used to. And you can never go back to your pre-mother self. And you can never go back to that person before you went through the divorce, before you lost a parent, before you lost a friend. So once again, it's this beautiful and yet so invisible recognition of these rites of passage in our life that you are forever changed because of this experience, whether it's a pregnancy loss, becoming a mother, losing a parent, having something like that in your life. You will never be that old version of yourself again. And within that, there is a grief. You're grieving what you lost, but you're also grieving yourself, the part of you that was innocent, the part of you that believed everything would be okay, the part of you that had that youthful, optimism. There's grief within yourself as well as grieving what you've lost.
Yeah. And all of it is valid and real.
Mm.
Again, I know I said this, I think it's worth repeating is just grief is not bad. Grief is a
Mm.
rite of passage. Grief is, and, you know, it doesn't have to be bad, like just because our identity is different isn't bad. We get to
Mm.
be a newer version of ourselves. And that doesn't mean our old version was bad. It was just different. I mean,
Yeah.
I think of the day that I learned of my dad's diagnosis. That was the day, the day that
Mm.
like my identity shifted almost, I would say in part to the same, like to when he actually died. And,
Mm.
that day I was this carefree, maybe a little bit spoiled, self-centered. I was nice, but I was a very different person. And then his sickness and his death changed me in ways. Would I give everything in the world to have him back? Yes. But did I become a very different person? Have I found a reason for his death? No, I don't like that everything happens for a reason. Topic for
Mm.
another day. But it
Mm.
changed me to my core. It changed me in so many ways that took me a very long time to accept and to process. and to take and then to use to help heal the world. And it's the same
Mm.
with matrescence as moms. We're not going to go back to that girl, to that woman we were. And that's okay. We can grieve that. We should grieve that. It's a change. It's a change in a familiar pattern of behavior. Valid. And we can also grieve. I didn't want to become this responsible person that has to be up at 5 every day and get the kids ready. We can still grieve that, and just realizing that it's all okay. It's all
Mm.
okay. And I think that's the hardest thing for us as moms too. And I know there are days I need to hear this too, is that it's okay to not be on all the time. What's important is that, where your heart is, right? Like, we're
Mm.
not going to be on. We're going to yell at our kids. We're going to maybe say very things we wish we could take back, but we get to
Mm.
repair and we keep trying and we keep building. So we grieve and we love, and or it's not one or the other. We
Mm.
grieve and we're grateful. So that's the other big thing is,
Oh,
you know, like we like I know I could probably assume we all love our children madly, and we also love when they go to bed,
yes.
and then we
Yes.
love when they wake up. And then,
Mm.
but that's also normal, right? So
Mm.
I'm just trying to like just really make sure that point comes across, because I think
You've done
it's
it
just so.
beautifully.
Thank you.
Mm.
I just think it's so valuable, and it was such a huge lesson for me too, that I really just want all moms, all grievers and moms to have that gift of just that one less reason to attack ourselves, like one way to just validate my feelings are real, no matter what they are.
Yes. And I guess what I can really hear from everything you said is that the timing around this, just as it is with matrescence, like just as it is with motherhood, I've been doing this for 17 years, this motherhood gig, and I still have moments where I'm like, I go back into that inner mean mama voice. I think that I should have had this figured out by now. I really, have those moments of self reflection, but in a negative way. And then I have to catch myself and really remind myself that every day is a new experience of this roller coaster, and I'm figuring it out all over again. And similarly with the grieving process, there isn't a you should be over this by now moment. This will evolve. New experiences, new reflections, new sensations will be coming up as you move through motherhood. And there is no timeline on this. To be incredibly kind to yourself, like you said, and to not internalize it, but instead use this language and this understanding to really move through it in your own way, and also talk to somebody around it, hopefully, that is there for you to be able to process what you're feeling. I'm really hearing such beautiful compassion for ourselves in these massive experiences of life that the world keeps telling us we should be okay by now. That's what I'm really hearing from you.
And there really is no timeline, and that's why I say, grief is nonlinear, matrescence, motherhood is nonlinear. And another thing that kind of ties it all together is when my father was sick and dying, one of the last things he said to me is, time is nonlinear and I'll always be with you. For a long
Mm.
time, I was like, what the heck does that actually mean? It sounds lovely. I have no idea what it meant. Um, Years later, I realized, like, really, grief is nonlinear. Motherhood is nonlinear. I named my practice the nonlinear journey, because
Mm.
everything that we're doing here is so nonlinear. Matrescence, motherhood, grief, all of it, life is nonlinear. And the other thing is, the surgeon doesn't do surgery on themselves. We're meant to be in a village. So when our inner me mama comes out, like my inner me mama, her name is Corella. She was hardcore this morning, like hardcore. And I needed to lean on my village when I was like, Corella's winning today. Like, I'm not
Yeah.
getting much done. And we're meant to be able to reach out, which, your community is just so gorgeous, because there's a whole team of us who are here to help support, and also to support each other, and because we're not meant to do this alone. So even when we have, 17 years of teaching, I've 10 years of grief on my belt, and there's still days where I'm like, nope, I'm
Yeah.
gonna
I've
go
forgotten
hide
all
under
the
the
tools
desk.
today. Exactly. I need to read my own book today.
Exactly. I'm like, what do I do in this case?
And let's normalize that as well. Oh, look, like I said right at the beginning, is the minute I met you, even before you started mummerizing, I was so excited about bringing this intersection between these two huge life experiences together. And I know that so many women move through matrescence and becoming a mother with this, while also carrying this huge process of grieving something in their life. So thank you for being such a powerful voice on the experience of grief and matrescence. I will put details in the show notes how anybody listening can reach out to you. You're going to share an amazing resource for anybody who wants to understand a little bit more and can also DM you and connect with you. But Ilana, thank you for your courage to, over the last, so many years, to understand grief better so that others can move through it with more grace and kindness, and now to also bring it to our work on matrescence. It's incredible.
Thank you so much. Thank you for leading the way and helping me find how my worlds line up with each other.
Yeah, thank you, beautiful.
Thank you.
Thanks, as always, for being a part of our global matrescence community. Please take a moment and make sure you're subscribed to this podcast in your podcast player so you can always be notified of our next episode. And if you would like to work with a coach on your own experience of matrescence, please go to mummerizing.net and explore our directory of phenomenal coaches, workshop leaders, space holders and facilitators around the globe. You can also explore our Global Matrescence Foundation and consider donating so a mama in need can access the support of one of our coaches and still ensure that our coaches receive the income and support they need so they can continue to work in this way. And finally, if you would like to be a coach, a facilitator and a matrescence activist in your own community, jump on our waitlist for our next intake of the Mama Rising Facilitator Training at mummerizing.net. Thank you for being here and being part of this movement. Until next week, bye.